Extracts. pp. 121 to 123. What exactly is justice and what does it achieve? But these are not the only outcomes of such practices. pp. 133 to 139. What exactly is equitable self-interest? The rivalrous realm of politics, hitting a midway point between two extremes. Whereas a courageous person, for instance, hits a midway point between cowardice and rashness, citizens who behave with propriety toward strangers avoid acting, on the one hand, like acquiescent people who accept everything and think it a duty to avoid giving pain to those with whom they come in contact, in E461-2, and on the other, like domineering people who object to everything and do not care in the least what pain they cause, Ibid. The central virtue of citizenship, then, is a midway point between acquiescence and domination. When Aristotle wants to name this virtue, he too can't. To it, he says, no special name has been assigned, though it most closely resembles friendship. It differs from friendship in not possessing the emotional factor of affection for one's associates, 465. He draws the analogy between citizenship and friendship so far as to conclude, in every constitution, friendship is as extensive as justice, 891. Friendship achieves what justice does. What exactly is justice and what does it achieve? Aristotle makes attempts on it from several angles, defining it in the Nicomachean Ethics, comparing and contrasting just and unjust regimes in the Politics, and proposing utopian visions of just cities in both the Nicomachean Ethics and the Politics. In the definition, he emphasizes the practices that constitute justice, in the comparisons, the outcomes of justice, and in the utopian vision, the problem that justice solves. It is necessary to lay these out in a short section of exegesis if we are to understand fully his link between justice and friendship. Once I have laid out the basic terms of Aristotle's account of justice, we will turn back to the question of friendship. Aristotle famously defines justice as comprising both universal virtue and also one particular virtue. Justice in its universal aspect is the ability to act in accord with all the virtues, temporarily, bravely, liberally, magnanimously, and also justly, in the particular sense of not taking more than one's fair share to eisen, and resisting the desire for unfair gain whether of money, honor, or something else, NE 526-12. Since his word for fair, to eisen, also means equal, particular justice, or justice as fairness, is also the ability to manage equality properly. When he divides particular justice itself into two types, each consists of a different approach to this task. Distributive justice, the first type, organizes the allotment of public goods, honor, money, property. It depends on a geometric or proportional notion of equality. For instance, two people get an equal amount to eat for dinner when each is served a portion in proportion to his appetite. Although one diner may get a larger serving than another, each will have been treated equally provided that in each case the serving matches the appetite. Every type of regime has its own principle of desert for deciding how to make proportional distributions. Aristocracies, for instance, assign greater benefits to nobly born citizens. Aristotle advocates instead an approach in which people receive benefits from the public store equivalent to what they have given to it, and he consistently argues, for instance, that the rich should contribute proportionally more wealth to the public store and receive proportionally more honor in return. Honor is the good that the poor have to give. The second type is straightening out justice. It ignores the public distributions that set all citizens in relation to one another geometrically, and instead straightens out the private transactions that have gone bad between two people. These transactions may have been entered into by the victim either voluntarily, as in contracts and business deals, or involuntarily, as in theft, assassination, false witness, assault, murder, maiming, and abusive language, NE 5:212-13. Typically, scholars have interpreted Aristotle to be recommending retributive punishment, whereby a wrongdoer suffers pain equal to what she has caused. In fact, the task of straightening out justice is broader. Whereas distributive justice protects proportional equality, the straightening out type focuses on arithmetical equality or strict equivalence, whereby everyone simply gets the same quantity of whatever good is being distributed. Take the right to vote as an example. These days one cannot give out more or less of it, but only give it or not. Nor in contemporary democracy is the right to vote distributed in proportion to anything else. Every adult gets one vote, even though one voter may be baser and another smarter. Aristotle explains how arithmetic equality factors into straightening out justice thus.
It makes no difference whether an estimable man Epiax has defrauded an insignificant man Pholon, or whether an insignificant man an estimable man, nor whether it is an estimable or insignificant man that has committed adultery. The law looks only at the nature of the damage to Blabus, treating the parties as equal, and merely asking whether one has done ho men Atticae and the other suffered injustice ho Dadicidae, whether one inflicted and the other has sustained damage. Hence the unjust being here the unequal, the judge endeavors to equalize it, inasmuch as when one man has received and the other has inflicted a blow, the suffering to pathos, and the doing he praxis of the deed are divided unequally diertai, Is anissa, and the judge endeavors to make them equal by the penalty or loss zemii he imposes, taking away the gain curtis. 543-4, trans modified slightly, emphasis added.
Every citizen deserves an autonomy equal to that of other citizens, but a crime leaves one person as a doer and another as a sufferer. Straightening out justice is responsible both for restoring and for preserving this equality of autonomy. Agency is the good it distributes according to the principle of strict equivalence. As a set of practices, then, Aristotelian justice involves first, managing an equal distribution of benefits and burdens, and second, protecting citizens' agency or autonomy. Equality and freedom are the objectives of this justice, but these are not the only outcomes of such practices. It's time to turn to Aristotle's comparisons of just and unjust regimes in the politics for a closer look at the outcomes of just practices. The discussion in the politics emphasizes the importance of practices compatible with those discussed in the ethics. Just regimes, for instance, govern according to the rule of law, which fends off arbitrariness and so protects the equality and freedom of citizens. And just regimes are governed in the interest of the people, not the ruler. But the most important point of comparison between just and unjust polities turns on their divergent outcomes. The best city makes its citizens virtuous, but there is a second, often overlooked point. The legitimate ruler rules willing and therefore free citizens subjects. The tyrant rules unwilling, enslaved subjects. Hecons versus Acons, P sub 3.9-10. To be ruled willingly is to have consented to obey Boulaminos Pitharchine as opposed to having been forced to submit, Bias Esti, 3.10-10. Practices for dealing with benefits, burdens, and autonomy in accord with principles autonomy no more consists of getting one's own way all the time in the political realm than in the sphere of friendship. It consists instead of getting one's way in concert with others and as modified by them. Friends have different purposes and hopes, and yet they somehow yoke these in ways that preserve not only equality, but also each friend's security and his autonomy. Practices of reciprocity coalesce in politics in the form of law and contract, but it is friendship's ability to achieve ethical and not merely legal exchange that outpaces justice. The friend who gives something to another without stated terms makes a sacrifice, and when Aristotle at last defines the equitable man, he is one who from practice and habit does what is equitable and does not stand on his rights unduly, but is content to receive a smaller share although he has the law on his side. He frequently repeats this. A friend disregards his own interest. He will surrender prostai schemata, wealth and power for friends and country, confident that the honor he receives instead is the greater good. 989. Ethical reciprocity begins with an act of sacrifice, and this is crucial to politics. No political order can meet the requirement that every collaborative decision be a perfect bargain for all parties, for life is not long enough to repay all debts in utility and pleasure friendship. Politics thus constantly opens exchanges that remain open for difficult lengths of time or even forever, and nothing but ethical reciprocity can make such delay bearable. Friendship makes such ethical forms of exchange possible by ensuring that social contexts are shaped by equitable, not rivalrous, self-interest. What exactly is equitable self-interest? Aristotle explains the idea by arguing that friends are second selves to each other. Friendship is the extension of one's interests to include someone else's in ways that annihilate loss.
In being a friend to their friend, friends care for their own good. For the good man in becoming dear to another becomes that other's good. Each party therefore both loves his own good and also makes an equivalent return by wishing the other's good. NE 855, emphasis added.
One wishes a friend well for one's own sake because the friend and the friendship have become part of one's self. And when we give things up for the sake of preserving the friendship, we discover that disappointment and consent are existentially compatible phenomena. If friendship extends the self, then one is not so much sacrificing oneself as acting in the interests of this new extended self. In most circumstances, there should be limits to what one is willing to give up, but this does not obscure the basic point. Sacrifice is friendship's fundamental act, and a crucial political one in that it is the only action that reconciles agency and autonomy with not getting what one wants. Whereas rivalrous self-interest is a commitment to one's own interests without regard to how they affect others, equitable self-interest treats the good of others as part of one's own interests. Rivalrous self-interest creates the conflicts of agency that drive the main engine of politics, but equitable self-interest resolves them. Equity thus entails giving in the public sphere, but there's more to be said about the equitability that characterizes friendship. Clearly, friends don't keep chits recording exactly who owes what to whom. Instead, when friendships successfully endure over time, it is because friends have developed heightened capacities for attending to what each is giving to the relationships, and where each needs to repay a gift. Citizens, too, need to cultivate such habits of attention in respect to their fellow citizens. Equity entails, above all else and as in friendship, a habit of attention by which citizens are attuned to the balances and imbalances in what citizens are giving up for each other. Here we must also confront the counterintuitive idea that citizens who give often and generously to other citizens may be distrusted, despite their equitability. Precisely because they are in a position to give more to other citizens than others give to them, they also often have the power to avoid making themselves vulnerable before strangers. They may be willing to give money or recognition to other citizens, and may do so frequently, but without giving them real power. They may have laid claim to a moral high ground on account of their gifts and to immunity from criticism that in itself provokes distrust. A friendship cannot survive if one friend insists on controlling all decisions, for friendship entails self-exposure. Citizens who act like political friends not only befriend others, making sacrifices for them, they are also willing to ask those others for favors. It's important for us to remember that friends are people to whom we are willing to be in debt while also knowing that we must acknowledge and repay our debts. 18. Citizenship combines equitable flexibility and a developed discourse of reciprocity with real habits of power sharing. What counts as power sharing will differ with context, but anyone who wishes to cultivate trust across boundaries of distrust must aspire to bring people on either side of the relevant boundary into shared decision-making with each other. How do citizens develop equitable self-interest? Ethical friends achieve their second self relationships and develop equitable self-interest because of emotional attachments. Family members do so because of homogeneity and blood loyalty. But what about utility friends? Aristotle writes of their bond.
All friendship, as we have said, involves some version of community koinonia. The difference between families and comrades, ten heterarchin, on the one hand and citizens on the other, is that the latter seem to be more in the way of a partnership koinonikais founded as it were on a definite agreement homologen. In families, the relationship comes not from agreement but from sameness. They are parts of themselves. One's offspring is a second self. NE 8:12-1.
Utility friends develop their relationship on the basis of agreement. They are busier than brothers, needing to negotiate not only specific conflicts but also the continuance of their relationships. That they will inevitably seek the continuance of political relationships is one of Aristotle's biggest claims. He argues that we human beings live in political communities not by accident, but because we desire to share our lives with strangers. Suzanne. Living together does not mean feeding in the same place as with cattle, but conversing and communicating thoughts and plans for the purpose of achieving some benefit in common. That unnamed virtue, which is like friendship but without the emotional charge, is excellence precisely at living together with strangers. This excellence is motivated by our own desire to live with, and ultimately not merely to eat beside but to talk to those strangers. Insofar as the preservation of the polity is in a citizen's interest, so too is it to her benefit to cultivate second self relations even with strangers. For my own long-term good, because I desire to continue living among strangers, the self-interest that marks my regard for my fellow citizens should be equitable, not rivalrous. Now we can see how friendship extends beyond justice. It contributes to politics two things that justice cannot. First, friendship cultivates a habitual expertise at the only practice that converts rivalrous into equitable self-interest. Sacrifice is the only act that might convince others to abandon legal for ethical forms of reciprocity, and to seek supplier means than strict barter to preserve autonomy. A signal sacrifice, like Elizabeth Eckford's, declares a context of equitability, not rivalry, to obtain. Her gift was one of faith. Second, friendship develops an awareness that our interests, properly understood, include a desire to preserve key relationships. Among these, the political bond especially requires active and constant rejuvenation. Character friendships are long-lasting, but utility relationships are not.
Friendship between good men is alone proof against calumny, for a man is slow to believe anybody's word about a friend whom he has himself tried and tested for many years. And with them there is mutual confidence in the incapacity ever to do each other wrong, and all the other characteristics that are required of true friendship, whereas in other forms of friendship, those of utility and pleasure, nothing keeps such things from happening. NE 8:4-3.
In utility, friendship's trust is impermanent. The relationship must fight against the corrosion of the ethical type of reciprocity into the minimalist, legal hand-to-hand type. Only friendship teaches citizens how to start over again with symbolically significant acts that regenerate trust where it has disintegrated. Aristotle writes that the Athenians set up a shrine of the Graces, the goddesses of charitable giving, in a public place to remind men that it is a duty not only to repay service done to one, but also to take the initiative in doing a service oneself. Someone like Elizabeth has to go first. Friendship thus turns out to be not merely a metaphor for citizenship but its crucial component. Why then have theorists been so tentative in positing a single name for good citizenship? The trouble is that citizenship engages so many human faculties and so diversely. It is not mere membership in a polity. It is not acting justly only, but also equitably. To do this requires A. An orientation toward others, a recognition how and why we have an interest in their good. B. Knowledge that rivalrous self-interest is the basic political problem for democracy. C. Habits as flexible as friendship for distributing benefits and burdens with a view to equality and autonomy. And D. A psychological state that in politics is called consent, but in other contexts, goodwill. The pull to draw analogies between citizenship, friendship, and justice derives from an instinctual recognition that these are three of the most complex, and also rewarding, of human activities precisely because all three try to convert rivalrous into equitable self-interest. Only friends fully succeed at converting rivalry into equitability. Wherever such a conversion occurs, people become friends. Only the idea of friendship captures the conjunction of faculties, the orientation toward others, knowledge of the world, developed practices, and psychological effects that must be activated in democratic citizenship if it is to succeed. Finally, friendship goes beyond justice by teaching us something that legal justice on its own cannot. Friendship is conceptually important because our experience of it teaches us that self-interest comes in a variety of types, ranging from the rivalrous self-interest of brothers who kill each other for the father's throne, to the equitable self-interest of friends who have secured their relationship. There is no such single thing, self-interest, as some economists pretend. An orientation toward wealth maximization is only one of several varieties. Indeed, when we talk about self-interest as if it comes only in the rivalrous form, and as if legal systems are all we need to manage it, we are giving law too much credit for maintaining the social bond. The legal system does not on its own restrain, and cannot on its own manage, the problem of rivalrous self-interest. Aristotle's biggest philosophical claim about politics is that our political relationships with fellow citizens are no different from friendships. If we always act according to our own unrestrained interests, we will corrode the trust that supports political bonds. When political scientists, economists, and politicians argue that, if every citizen simply pursues her own self-interest without reservation, the common good will result, they make a sad mistake. No consensually based form of social organization can, over the long term, sustain relationships of cooperation in the face of unrestrained self-interest. The self-interest that marks a citizen's regard for her fellow citizens must necessarily, if it is to serve her well, be equitable. A real social capital problem is simply that we have come to believe that self-interest comes only in one form, namely the rivalrous variety, when in fact it inhabits a spectrum from rivalrous to equitable. Any effort to cultivate friendship preserves a valuable cultural understanding of that spectrum. Once again, the guilty party behind our modern tendency to reduce the notion of self-interest to its rivalrous variants and to elevate law as the only tool necessary for dealing with the problem is Hobbes. As we saw at the start of the chapter, he reduced citizenship to fear and set self-interest in opposition to charity. His strong distinction between self-interest and altruism was crucial to his effort to certify institutions as capable of solving the problem of distrust without any help from citizenship. If political bonds rest only on self-interest and fear, and not more broadly on practices like friendship, politicians, working within institutions, can sustain them simply by manipulating the baser human drives. But modern politics and its repeated, and if anything, proliferating experience of civil war has proved Hobbes wrong. Institutions cannot on their own solve the problem of rivalrous self-interest in the polity. There too, if citizens wish to secure the social bond that constitutes their polity over the long term, it is crucial to seek cultural habits based on equitable, not rivalrous, self-interest. The cultivation of a cultural orientation toward equitable self-interest requires three things. First, recovery of the idea that self-interest comes in a variety of forms. Second, recognition that preserving the political bond is in every citizen's interest. And third, an understanding that only equitable forms of self-interest can sustain the political bond or any form of social bond. These are the philosophical claims that must anchor any cultural form in which the generation of trust is to be prioritized. They are in fact the ideas that already anchor friendship's core practices of equity and power sharing, and indeed as transposed to our interactions with strangers, these habits of political friendship, equity, and power sharing are what give equitable self-interest, and the ideas behind it, living shape in the public world. Friendship is the bond of the city, as Aristotle argued, and political friendship is not merely a serviceable aspiration but a crucial one. Citizens who adopt it commit themselves to pursuing liberty and equality simultaneously, and to resisting accounts of politics that insist that commitment to one requires shortchanging the other. At present, we are in more danger of losing the commitment to equality than the commitment to liberty. Since most people spend more time practicing friendship than any other activity, getting better at it as they grow older, many of us have a rich intuitive knowledge of what maintains consensual relationships. But how on earth can the techniques and expertise of friendship be conveyed into the rivalrous realm of politics? You have reached the end of the document.